Welcome, my spooky friends, to Mrs. Strange. If you are new here, on this channel we explore everything that is strange, unexplained, and downright terrifying. So if you're interested, make sure to subscribe and stick around. For today's video, we're going to be exploring some true but very scary stories. So grab your snacks or lay back and relax, and let's jump into these creepy ass stories. Hospitals are meant to be a place for healing, but sometimes they become a place of darkness, where something that shouldn't be there lurks, just out of sight. It was in the middle of the night when Sarah woke up in the hospital room, her body aching after a serious car accident. The IV line attached to her arm beeped rhythmically as the machine monitored her vitals. Everything seemed normal, but something felt wrong. She glanced around the room, and that's when she saw it. A shadow, darker than the rest of the room, standing at the foot of her bed. It was tall and featureless, but the movement was unmistakable. It shifted as though it was observing her. Sarah blinked, thinking it was just a trick of the dim lights or her tired eyes, but when she looked again, it was still there, this time moving closer. Terrified, she tried to call out for help, but no sound left her lips. The shadow inched forward, and the air around her felt colder. Suddenly, she heard a voice, a whisper, like a breath at her ear. "I'm here." She turned her head and screamed, but no one came. By the time the nurse arrived, the shadow was gone, and Sarah was left trembling, unsure if it had been an hallucination or something far worse. The next day, Sarah spoke to the nurse, who told her an unsettling fact. The room she was in had been previously occupied by a patient who had died under mysterious circumstances, and some staff had reported strange occurrences during the night shifts. In the hospital, it's easy to feel like you're not alone, because sometimes you're not. The world can feel safe when you're home, but what happens when the safety of your own four walls feels like a trap? It started innocently enough. Mary had just moved into her new apartment in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was a perfect place to escape the chaos of the city, or so she thought. But soon, Mary began noticing something odd. Every time she stepped outside, she would see her neighbor across the street staring at her from his window. At first, she thought it was a coincidence, but the longer she lived there, the more frequent it became. He was always watching, his face pressed against the glass, no matter the time of day or night. It felt like he was waiting for her to look up so he could make eye contact. One evening, after weeks of unease, Mary decided to confront him. She walked over to his house and knocked. The man answered, but his expression was blank, almost robotic. When she asked him why he was always watching her, he didn't respond immediately. He just stared at her. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing at the door with her heart racing. Later that night, Mary saw him again standing at his window. Only this time, there was something even more unsettling. He wasn't alone. She could see a silhouette of someone else behind him, their face barely visible. It was a dark figure, standing still, watching her. Terrified, Mary called the police. When they arrived and checked, their neighbor's house was empty. There was no sign of anyone living there anymore. The apartment had been vacant for months. Mary never saw that figure again. Or did she? Sometimes when you feel like somebody's watching, it's not just your imagination. I remember in my old house, there was a day that I was terrified. I was on the treadmill and I was walking. This was when I was in high school. I felt like somebody was creeping right from the living room. So imagine this. The layout of it was like the living room was to the left, and then this was the kitchen. There was like a door that attached both the kitchen and the living room. And directly in front of the door, there was the treadmill, and I was walking on it, and I could feel somebody just watching me from the living room, and there was nobody there. Like, it was dark, but I knew there was an entity there staring at me, and I was like, I'm done with my workout. And I just went to my bedroom and I was like, yeah, Not happening today. I'll do it during the daytime. I feel like we always have instincts. So if you ever feel paranoid or feel like something's wrong, just leave. Just go. Okay, next story. Traveling can bring unexpected surprises, but for some, it brings something far darker than they could ever imagine. It was a stormy night when Jack and his friends pulled into a small roadside motel after a long drive. They were exhausted and needed somewhere to sleep. The motel appeared run down but had a vacancy sign flashing in the rain. After paying for the room, the clerk gave them an odd look but didn't say anything. Once inside, the air felt colder than it should have been. The room was small, furnished with faded sheets and old furniture, but something about that place felt off. That night, as Jack was trying to sleep, he heard a strange noise, scratching, tapping, like someone was trying to get in. At first, he thought it was the wind, but the sound grew louder and more frantic. He tried to ignore it, but then he saw it. A shadow moving across the wall under the flickering light of the lamp. Jack sat up, his heart pounding. The shadow stopped right at the front of his bed. Terrified, he turned on the light, but the room was empty. There was no one there. When he opened the door to check the hallway, the clerk was nowhere to be seen. The next morning, Jack tried to leave, but the storm had made the roads impassable. He reluctantly returned to the room. When he asked the clerk about the strange noises, the clerk just stared at him. Later, Jack learned that the motel had a dark history. Many years ago, a family had stayed in the room and they had vanished without a trace. The room was said to be cursed with a lingering presence that scared away anyone who tried to stay there. In motels and hotels across the world, there are rooms that refuse to be forgotten. Rooms where the past lingers, waiting for new guests to arrive. Personal story, I stayed in a hotel with my husband one night, either at the beach or on base, like a military base. Imagine this, the bed is right in front of the door. It's kind of like a small room, and I see myself laying down and I get up straight, like from my torso and up. My legs are like still straight because I was laying on the bed, and I see right at the door there's this lady. She's African American. She's kind of big and she's wearing white, and she's like yelling at this man who I see to my left. I turn around slowly and it's a man. He's African American and very thin, and he's wearing like those wife beaters, and she's fussing him out saying, "You don't have any money, I'm leaving." Like, I literally felt like that was not a dream. I don't know what it was. It had to have something like lingering around from the past, because when I took the story to a research center where they explore paranormal activity, they were like, it sounds like it was a prostitute telling the man that he didn't have any money, so she was leaving. At first, like, I didn't know what that freaking meant. I was like, okay. But when I actually took my story and I got it like analyzed, I was like, that totally makes sense. That was one of the most creepiest moments at a hotel for me. I've had many, to be honest. Whew. I'm literally getting goosebumps because I know I won't be able to sleep tonight. Okay, next story. We all know that feeling of somebody that is staring at us from behind. But what happens if the person who watches you never leaves your side? Maria was driving home late one evening, her headlights cutting through the thick fog on the empty highway. She wasn't in a rush, just enjoying the quiet, until she noticed something strange in her rearview mirror. A car had been following her for miles. At first, it was just a shadowy silhouette in the distance, but as time passed, the car drew closer, matching her speed exactly. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was deliberately tailing her. She tried speeding up, but the car did too. Slowing down didn't help either. The car remained right behind her, too close for comfort. Panic started creeping in. Every time she glanced in her rearview mirror, the car was still there, just inches behind her. Finally, she decided to take an exit and drive through a gas station, hoping to shake the stranger off. But as she pulled into the station, the car followed her. She got out of her car and looked around. The car pulled up to a stop, and the driver stepped out. To Maria's shock, it wasn't a stranger. It was her own husband. He had been out looking for her, worried after she'd called earlier and mentioned something strange happening on the road. The human mind can play tricks, but sometimes the things that we hear are more than just our imagination. Sarah had just moved into her new house, a charming old place on the edge of town. She loved everything about it, except for one thing, the voice. It started as whispers, barely audible, but clear enough to make her stop and listen. She would be alone in the house when she heard it. Soft and indistinct at first, like someone calling her name from another room. First, she dismissed it. Old houses cracked and groaned, and she assumed it was just the house settling. But then, it got louder. One night, Sarah sat on her couch and she heard it again. Much clearer this time. "Sarah!" She froze, the hair on the back of her neck standing up. She wasn't imagining it. The voice was coming from the hallway, right outside her living room. Sarah ran to the door and flung it open, only to find the hallway completely empty. The voice stopped, and she could still feel its presence. Later, she learned from a neighbor that the previous owner of the house had gone missing under mysterious circumstances, and some believed their spirit still lingered, trying to communicate with those who moved in. Comment below, trust your instincts if you made it this far, so I know that you watched the entire video. Make sure to share this video and give it a big thumbs up. Thank you so much for your support. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye!